Good morning, students. Before proceeding with the lesson 2, dear, let us brush our knowledge regarding the past class. In the previous class, we learnt about a lesson called 2, dear. In this lesson, there is a main character called the King of Monaco. And this person, even though he is a king, everything happened in this particular country called Monaco in a smaller scale. And this country had a population of only 7,000 people. And even if that entire population got the land distributed among them, each individual will hardly get an acre of land. Like any other country, even in this country called Monaco, the king levied taxes on so many commodities like wine and spirits, tobacco and poll tax. But the income which was generated through these particular taxes were not sufficient for the king to run his administration and also to look after himself. So he was searching for a new source of revenue, and eventually he found out a source of revenue which came from a special source called gambling house. In that gambling house or gaming house, a particular game was played that is called roulette. Though it was considered as a dirty business, because so many people suffered because of that, it brought enough harm to them. Still, the King of Monaco was left with no other option, because he had to get enough income to run his administration. So all these things we learned in the previous class. Let us proceed further in this class. He has his coronation, his levies, he rewards, sentences and pardons, and he also has his reviews, councils, laws and courts of justice, just like other kings. But the only problem here is everything was done in a smaller scale. Till this we learned in the previous class. And now it happened a few years ago that a murder was committed in this king's domains. Suddenly this kingdom, which was peaceable all this time, experienced a problem, a crisis. That was a murder was committed in that particular toy kingdom. Till then such a event never happened in that particular country. The people of that kingdom are peaceable. That means they are known to live in a peaceful manner. And such a thing had not happened before. So this case was brought into the notice of the judge, as it is done in any other country. So the judges assembled with much ceremony and tried the case in the most judicial manner, in the most impartial manner. There were judges and prosecutors, lawyers, jurymen, committee of judges, barristers, once again advocates. They argued and judged. The case was argued in the court of justice, and eventually finally a judgment or verdict was pronounced. And at last they condemned the criminal to have his head cut off. As per the law of Monaco, a person who committed murder, his head has to be cut off. That was the judgment pronounced even in this particular country. So far so good. Everything was going on in a smooth manner. Next, they submitted the sentence to the king. Now they needed a final approval. After the judges sentenced him to death, that is, his head has to be cut off, it has to be approved by the King of Monaco. The king read the sentence and confirmed it. Even the king affirmed it. If the fellow must be executed, execute him. The king said, if the fellow has to be executed, let him be executed. But there was only one hitch in the matter. Hitch means a hurdle, obstacle. And what was that hitch? And that was that they had neither a guillotine for cutting the heads off. It is a machine which was used in France to cut a man's head off. But this particular country called Monaco, they did not have this machine. So that was the obstacle which they faced. Nor an executioner. Executioner is a person who executes. Even they did not have a concerned person to execute the criminal. So the ministers considered the matter. So it was brought into the notice of the ministers. The ministers assembled, they discussed how to get rid of this problem, and eventually decided to address an inquiry to the French government. Monaco lies on the borders of France and Italy. These are the two neighboring countries. So they wanted to send a letter inquiring, asking the French government whether they can supply a machine and an expert. And decided to address an inquiry to the French government, asking the French government whether the French could not lend them, means give them a machine and an expert to cut off the criminal's head. And if so, that means if it was possible with them, would the French kindly inform them what the cost would be? How much might be the cost to do this execution? The letter was sent. The ministers from Monaco sent a letter to the French government. A week later, after a week had passed, the reply came. They got a reply from the French government. A machine and an expert could be supplied and the cost would be 16,000 francs. Now that was the currency which was used in France during that time. They said it would cost 16,000 francs. Now this was laid before the king. Once again they needed a final approval from the king. So this information was given or passed on to the king, and they needed a final approval from the king. He thought it over. That means the Prince of Monaco thought about this particular decision taken by the ministers. 16,000 francs. He said the wretch, means that rascal, is not worth the money. That means that criminal, doesn't deserve to be spent so much on him. So the king was very much worried. He cannot afford to spend almost 16,000 francs on a criminal. Said he, can't it be done somehow cheaper? So the king of Monaco is inquiring, asking with his ministers, can't this particular execution be done much cheaper? Because he thinks, why 16,000 francs is more than 2 francs a head on the whole population. The problem which the king of Monaco faced was, if ever the kingdom of Monaco spends 16,000 francs on executing a criminal, that means they have to impose some extra tax on the entire population of Monaco. That is, there are hardly 7,000 individuals living in Monaco. It will be more than a franc on the individuals, because there are only 7,000. That means more than one means exactly almost 2 francs on each and every individuals. They might be forced to spend more than 2 francs on all these individuals. The people won't stand it. If ever they ask the people to give 2 francs to execute the criminal, the people won't stand. That means they won't keep quiet. They will create a riot. They'll create some unrest in that kingdom, and it may cause a riot. So this is what the king was worried about. So a council was called to consider what could be done, and it was decided to send a similar inquiry to the king of Italy. Now once again the ministers assembled. Now once again it was discussed in that committee what could be done to solve this obstacle, and they collectively decided that this time they will send an inquiry to one more neighboring country, that is to the king of Italy. And they also decided that the French government is a republican. That means it has to seek the permission of all the concerned officials before coming to a conclusion. Whereas, as a result, they don't have proper respect for the kings. But the king of Italy was a brother monarch. He was kind of a brother to the king of Monaco. And he might be induced, means he might be made to do the thing, means supplying a guillotine machine as well as an executioner much cheaper. That is what the ministers decided. In comparison to the French government, the Prince of Italy might do this work much cheaper. So the letter was written to the King of Italy, and a prompt reply was received. The Italian government wrote that they would have pleasure, that means they would be very happy in supplying both a machine and an expert. And the entire cost would be 12,000 francs including traveling expense. When we compare the reply given by the Italian government or the Prince of Italy to that of the French government, they said they would do this execution much cheaper than the French government. That is, they would do this execution at just 12,000 francs. And they also said that this 12,000 francs will also include traveling expense as well as an expert will be supplied in that particular amount. This was cheaper in comparison to the reply given by the French government. But still it seemed too much for the Prince of Monaco. Because the rascal was really not worth the money. It would still mean nearly 2 francs more per head on the taxes. Still it is almost like spending 2 francs on the entire population. That is the entire individuals right, people living in Monaco might be, right, forced to give a tax of, right, almost 2 francs each. It's, right, still like asking 2 francs from each and every individual. So the king thought even this, right, option won't work. So another council was called. They discussed and considered how it could be done with less expense. Could not one of the soldiers perhaps be got to do it in a rough and homely fashion? So once again the ministers assembled, they discussed, and now this time they thought of a, right, they came out with the option that can't we ask with the soldiers, right? There is no need for the soldiers to do this execution in a correct way. Even if they do in a rough and homely fashion, it is okay, right? That is the conclusion they came in that particular meeting, right? We just ask with the soldiers to execute this criminal. Even if they execute the criminal in a rough and homely fashion, that will do. So the general was called and was asked. The general is the head of the army. So the general was asked, and he was asked to, right, inquire with his soldiers whether any one of the soldier is ready to execute the criminal. And this is what the minister said to the general. Can't you find us a soldier who could cut the man's head off? In war, they don't mind killing people, right? That is what the, right, soldiers are for. So in war, the soldiers don't mind killing, right, enemies. So, right, it might be easy for them to execute the criminal. That is what the minister said to the general, right? They asked the general to inquire with the soldiers whether it was possible with them to execute the criminal, because that is what they do in war. In fact, that is what they are trained for. So the general talked it over with the soldiers to see whether one of them could not undertake the job. So immediately the general called for a meeting of soldiers, and in the meeting the general asked with the soldiers if anyone was, right, ready to execute the criminal. But none of the soldiers would do it. No, they replied. They replied in negative. They said, we are not, right, going to do this. And the reply and the reason given by them was, we don't know how to do it. It is not a thing we have been taught. We have never been taught how to execute a criminal. So we don't know how to execute a criminal. So we are not going to undertake this task. What was to be done? Once again, right, the king of Monaco and the ministers were in a fix. Then fix means they were in utter, right, confusion or dilemma. They did not know what to do, how to overcome this, right, hurdle or obstacle. Again, the ministers considered and reconsidered. They, right, convened a meeting. Different, right, opinions, right, were shared by, right, ministers. And every now and then they kept on, right, changing, right, the decision which they came to. So they considered and reconsidered. They assembled a commission. Eventually a commission was formed. Under the commission there was a committee, and under a committee there was a subcommittee. So they made different committees to get rid of this crisis. And at last they decided that the best thing would be to alter means to change the death sentence to one of imprisonment for life. Imprisonment for life means putting a person in jail till he dies. So they thought the best way to get rid of this problem is to, right, change death sentence into imprisonment for life. They thought this will work. This particular option will work. This would enable, means this would make the king to show his mercy, and it would come cheaper. They also told about this, right, discussion which they came out with to the king. They said, if we alter death sentence into imprisonment for life, even people will have, right, good regards for you. They will think that the king has showed mercy on the criminal, and also this particular way will work in much cheaper way. The king agreed to this. The king agreed for this particular, right, decision taken by the ministers. Now one thing which we can notice about the king is the king blindly agrees to whatever suggestion which was given by the ministers. He doesn't have a, right, a mindset to take on his own decision. For each and every right thing, he relies only on his ministers. The king agreed to this, and so the matter was arranged. That means the king told the ministers to change death sentence into imprisonment for life. Now again they had a hurdle. The only hitch means hurdle, obstacle or a crisis or a problem. And now was that there was no suitable prison for a man sentenced for life. Now this is the first time they are facing such a problem in their kingdom. So they don't have a proper place to keep a person or a criminal till he dies. So this was the hurdle, one more hurdle which they faced. They don't have a proper lockup. There was a small lockup where people were sometimes kept temporarily, but there was no strong prison fit for permanent use. They had a small lockup where whenever a person did some petty crimes, they were kept in that small lockup. But they don't have a big jail as such to put a person in that prison till he dies. So this was the hitch. However, they managed to find a place that would do. Eventually, after enough deliberations, they found a suitable place to accommodate this criminal till he dies. And they put the young fellow, means the criminal, there and placed a guard over him. They also appointed a guard to look after this criminal. The guard had to watch the criminal. Watch means to look after. His duty was to look after the criminal, and had also to fetch his food from the palace kitchen. The guard had two duties. The first and foremost duty is to look after, to watch over the criminal, and second duty is he was made to bring, or he was asked to bring food for the criminal from the palace kitchen. The prisoner remained there month after month till a year had passed. The criminal stayed in that particular prison month after month, and finally one entire year had passed. But when a year had passed, when a year had completed, the kinglet means a small king, looking over the account of his income and expenditure, one day noticed a new item of expenditure. Expenditure means the amount which is spent on a particular goods or commodity. One particular day, the king was going through the balance sheet of that entire year. How much they spent and how much was the revenue which they derived from taxes. When they're tallying the income and expenditure, he found a special expenditure. And this expenditure he did not notice all the previous years. Suddenly this particular year, he found a new expenditure. A new item of expenditure. And this was for the keep of the criminal. Keep means maintenance. He found a new item of expenditure. They spent so much amount for a new item, and this new item was to watch over the criminal, to maintain the criminal. And how much it was? Nor it was a small item either. It was not a small expenditure, because there was a special guard to look after the criminal, and there was also the man's food. So this expenditure was incurred for looking after the criminal and also for providing him food. It came to more than 600 francs. For one particular year, they spent almost 600 francs for the keep of the criminal. And it was too much. The king could not digest this fact. And the worst of it was that the fellow was still young. Now one more thing which worried the king was, this criminal was very young. He was very young and also healthy, and might live for another 50 years. He might live for another 50 years. Just imagine 50 into 600 francs. It's a huge amount. The king could not digest this fact. When one came to reckon it up, the matter was serious. It was very serious. When you think about these calculations, 50 into 600, it is a serious matter, which has to be addressed at the earliest. It would never do. So the king summoned his ministers. Summoned means called his ministers and said to them, you must find some cheaper way of dealing with this rascal. We cannot stick on to the current plan. It's not going to work. So you have to come out with a cheaper way of dealing with this criminal. The present plan is too expensive. That is why the title too dear. Too dear means very costly or very expensive. And the ministers met as usual and considered and reconsidered. They came out with different options. Few of them accepted it, few of them rejected the proposal. And once again, they kept on, right, discussing again and again. Considered and reconsidered. And the ministers met and considered and reconsidered. Till one of them said, "Gentlemen, in my opinion, we must dismiss the God." They thought the best way to deal with this problem is we must dismiss the God, because for the maintenance of the criminal, we appointed a God and we are providing food to the criminal. And for providing food as well as for the right salary which is given to the God, it almost comes to 600 francs a year. It comes to 600 francs a year. So they thought the best way is to dismiss the God. But then rejoined another minister. But then one more minister, right, came out with his suggestion. The fellow will run away. He says, if we dismiss the God, the criminal will run away, he will escape. He will escape. Well, said the first speaker, let him run away. First speaker means the minister who spoke previously. Let him run away and be hanged to him. So they reported the result of their deliberations to the kinglet. So they write the decision which they took, right? They told about this particular matter to the king. They told that the best way is to dismiss the God, so that the criminal will run away on his own. So they reported the result of their deliberations, means findings, to the kinglet. And the kinglet means a small king, and he agreed with them. The God was immediately dismissed, and they waited to see what would happen next. Now the God is dismissed. Now they are eagerly waiting for the criminal to escape or run away from the prison. But all that happened was that at dinner time, the criminal came out, and not finding his God, he went to the king's kitchen to fetch his own dinner. But nothing happened as they thought. During dinner time, the criminal waited for the God to come and provide him food. When he came to realize that the God is nowhere to found, nowhere to be seen, the God is nowhere to be seen, he immediately stepped out of his prison, straight away went to the palace kitchen and fetched his own food. Students, we'll wind up here and let us continue the remaining part in the next class. Thank you.